We will start with Chapter 3, the target populations, sampling frames, and coverage error. In the introduction, sample surveys describe or make inferences to well-defined populations. Elements are the fundamental units of population. The totality of the elements forms the full population. Because surveys evolved as tools to describe fixed finite populations, survey researchers are specific and explicit about definitions of populations under study. The target population is the group of elements for which the survey investigator wants to make inferences using the sample statistics. We use the finite in size, have some time restrictions, and we need it to be observable. These aspects are desirable for achieving clear understanding of the meaning of the survey statistics and for permitting replication of the survey. The target population definition has to specify the kind of units that are elements in the population and the time extent of the group. A household includes all of the persons who occupy a housing unit, while a housing unit is a house, an apartment, a mobile home, a group of homes, or a single room that is occupied as separate living quarters. Since the population changes over time, the time of the survey also defines the target population, where members of the household are fixed at the time of first contact in many surveys. A survey population is the restricted population. It is not the intended target population, and yet it is realistically the actual population from which the survey data are collected. A sampling frame is a set of materials used to identify the elements of the target population. They are lists or procedures intended to identify all elements of a target population. When available sampling frames miss the target population partially or entirely, the survey researcher faces two options. First, they can redefine the target population to fit the frame better, which focuses on issues of relevance to different users of the survey. Or secondly, you can admit the possibility of coverage error in statistics describing the original target population. This focuses on statistical weaknesses of the survey operations. The coverage properties of sampling frames. The match of sampling frame to target population creates three potential outcomes: coverage, undercoverage, and ineligible units. Coverage is when a target population element is in the sampling frame. Undercoverage is when eligible members of the population cannot appear in any sample drawn from the survey. Ineligible units occur when there are units on the frame that are not in the target population. A sampling frame is perfect when there is a one-to-one mapping of frame elements to target population elements, but perfect frames do not exist. Two other problems can occur. First, duplication, which is when several frame units are mapped onto the single element in the target population, or clustering, which is when multiple elements of the target population are linked to the same single frame element. Undercoverage. It threatens to produce errors of omission in survey statistics from failure to include parts of the target population in any survey using the frame. The causes of coverage problems depend on the processes used to construct the sampling frame. Those processes may be under the control of the survey design, or they may be external to the survey. Area frame samples or area probability samples are survey samples initially based on a list of areas. You can miss housing units from hidden entrances, buildings, hidden single units, imaginary lines dividing areas, communal living arrangements, or institutions. Also, housing may be specified, but not how many people live there. Who are considered the residents? We can use the de facto rule, which states persons who slept in the housing units the previous night are included, or the de jure rule, which states those who usually live in a housing unit, their usual residents. The problems are people who travel, or those under 18, or not legal. Ineligible units. Sampling frames contain elements that are not part of the target population. When foreign units are identified, they can be purged. However, they cannot be identified until data collection begins. Clustering of target population elements within frame elements. Multiple mappings of frames to population or population to frame are problems. One way to react is by selecting all eligible units in a cluster. However, it may be difficult to collect information successfully from all elements in the cluster. Also, respondents may discuss answers with others, which may sway them. If all frame elements are given equal chances, but one eligible selection is made from each, then elements in large clusters have lower overall probabilities of selection than elements in small clusters. The problems are that they end up overrepresenting. Duplication of target population elements in sampling frames. This has the same overrepresentation problem as clustering. If there is a correlation between duplication and variables of interest, then survey estimates will be biased. Unfortunately, this is usually unknown. Duplicates can be purged prior to sample selection and can reduce by weighting every element. Complicated mappings between frame and target population elements. Multiple frame units map to multiple population elements. Combination of clustering and duplication. How can we solve this? By weight survey results. The common target populations and their frame issues. Surveys most commonly target the household population of a geographical area. In the US, the common sampling frames for households are area frames, telephone numbers, telephone listings, and mailing lists. The area frame issues are under coverage if units are missing or missed, duplication if a person has more than one residence, clustering if multiple people live in the final frame. These are listed telephone numbers frame in the US is smaller than the total numbers. Duplication if the same number is listed under two different names. If we use the email frame instead, then we get duplication if one person can have many emails, or clustering because more than one person share an email. Another target population would be customers, employees, or members of an organization. If we use list frames, then we can either get an electronic file of person records or a physical set of records. There may be under coverage if they are out of date. They can be ineligible if employees who left are not purged quickly. And there is duplication if customer is counted multiple times. If we target the organizations, then sampling frames are lists of units. Businesses are the most frequent target population. We can have coverage issues which emphasize larger businesses and miss smaller ones. They can be highly dynamic, businesses can merge or separate, or we need to specify between using an entity versus a location. For example, McDonald's. Are we going to check every McDonald's in New York City, or are we going to check McDonald's as a whole? We can check events, which begin with a frame of persons. They can be experienced event or has not, or you can check if a person experienced multiple events. We can use time units by asking the purpose of a visit, how long it lasted, or the most or least enjoyable parts. We can also check rare populations. Rare populations describe small target groups of interest to researchers. Size relative to available frames make them rare. We can either check the rare populations themselves, which has no good coverage and multiple lists can be made, or we can check a subset of elements screened, which has a complete coverage as possible. Coverage error. Coverage error is a property of sample statistics and estimates made from surveys. Coverage bias is given by capital Y subscript C bar, which is the mean of the population in the frame, minus capital Y bar, which is mean for the total population, which equals U, which is the population elements, over N, the full population, times the parentheses of capital Y subscript C bar minus capital Y subscript U bar, which is the mean of the population not in the frame. The survey only estimates capital Y subscript C bar. Under coverage could be higher for total sample than a particular group. Coverage error can vary from one statistic to another, even if they are based on the same subclass of eligible units. The half-open interval. We add missing units to a half-open interval where subsampling is compensated by weighting. We can do multiplicity sampling, which is a method which adds elements to a population through network sampling, where the size of the network determines the number of duplicate chances of selection. We check the response error. Another example of multiplicity sampling is snowball sampling. We're asking the population to identify others. However, there can be measurement error. We can also check multiple frame designs, which use supplemental frames. They may overlap with principal frames. The solutions include to screen the area household frame, to attempt interviews in all sample households or using the overlap in the estimation. Lastly, we can increase coverage while including more ineligible elements. However, issues arise within sample households. There can be failure to report those who fit the target definition of whether you're using the de jure or the de facto rules, and when asking more questions to widen the net. Coverage error exists independent of the sampling steps in surveys.